A brief introduction to Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. For my 17th and 18th century philosophy class. I guess we'll meet live we're back on Zoom. Just for this week, supposedly dealing with an outbreak. But I find this rather a bummer. But I guess I'm now familiar with doing this, trying to do a video lecture. It's very fun. Well, how fun is it really? Could be worse. And I'll tell you what, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, right or wrong maybe, that doesn't seem fair, is really fun. Okay, just in the sense that, I mean, I feel the same way about Spinoza, and Descartes really gives you this flavor. Francis Bacon gives you this flavor. Hume gives you this flavor. Maybe that's sort of, it starts to wind down then. But I love these figures because of how bold they are, how wild the speculation is, how open the territory seems to them. How fresh answers seem to beckon on these very fundamental matters. And they keep sort of having breakthroughs and stuff, or it seems that way. Or at least extremely interesting arguments with one another. And also, this is a moment where there's an international, well, certainly international in the sense of between nations, dialogue among the intellectuals of Europe, developing throughout this period. But Leibniz is a beautiful emblem of that. He's bopping around the continent on various diplomatic missions and things like this. Visiting Spinoza, which is in itself a bold move. I think he's got Spinoza in his head a lot, actually. He's responding to kind of the same, continental philosopher might say, the same problematic as Spinoza. Or Spinoza maybe is nagging at him in an interesting way. Like how to avoid Spinoza's conclusions, I guess you'd say. Okay. Well, so in this, I just want to introduce him and maybe place him a little bit within the framework of the philosophers we're discussing this semester, and segue him out from Spinoza a little bit, and then we'll hit the monadology, I guess, live on Zoom on Thursday. All right. Well, and I have a handout. I'll post it on Moodle. I guess I haven't quite yet. On some Leibnizian terms, because he really does throw a lot of vocabulary at you. And it's coming from everywhere, man. Like scholastic philosophy, Aristotle, but he's an incredibly erudite and well-read person, and he kind of displays that maybe even in the sheer vocabulary he throws around out of a number of languages even. So, he's talking about entelechies. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. I don't want to know how to pronounce it. Okay, but we'll, eventually I'll say something about entelechies. That's on the handout, I guess. He's an arch-rationalist. The traditional setup here, which is simplistic, but people keep returning to it anyway, and I think with some reason, of rationalism versus empiricism. We have done, as we do Leibniz, we will have talked about, the usual three great figures of rationalism. Spinoza, Descartes, Spinoza, and Leibniz. And then we'll be on to, and we're kind of a week ahead, which is amazing, but rare, because I cut out part of Spinoza, I guess. But then we'll be on to the golden age of empiricism. Okay, and there is a distinction, and one way to see it, nowhere is this distinction more clear than in Leibniz. Leibniz is the arch rationalist of all times, okay? And we can try to say fairly precisely what that means. I mean, I think one thing that is at stake is, what is science going to look like? Is it going to be concentrated on, a priori conceptual techniques, including mathematics and logic? Is that what we need to clear up first or whatever? Or is that fundamentally the source of the knowledge, even knowledge that we gather by experiment or observation? Or is it the experiments and observations themselves that maybe even guide the principles by which we interpret? In other words, and I'd say, it's not a simple solution, actually. If you think about the role of mathematics in physics, okay, I'd be a physicist myself, except that I can't do the math whatsoever, okay? There's an a priori element in physics, that's for dang sure. But in many, even in all disciplines there are, of empirical science, there are, at a minimum mathematical techniques, but all kinds of logical equipment for what is, what conclusions can be drawn from what sorts of data and so on. Okay, so it's a struggle, but Leibniz's answer ultimately really is all the way into the rational. And mathematics is the model, and, both observational empirical science and mathematics are in unbelievable periods of innovation. And frigging Leibniz and, his rival and acquaintance, Isaac Newton, inventing calculus simultaneously. Okay, right then, if we're looking at Pascal's contributions to probability theory, or Descartes on geometry, okay, coordinate geometry, it's amazing, and and it is interlocked with the what we would think of as maybe the observational or empirical breakthroughs as well. All right, now, okay. So for Leibniz, one way to frame the rationalist empiricist debate is a priori versus a posteriori. There must be handouts. I must have put this on the board. The words keep coming back. And the distinction in one set of terms or another is just central to every single figure that we're discussing. What knowledge, it's an epistemological distinction, as a reminder. What is knowable independently of experience? That's the a priori. And what is only knowable through experience, through observation, let's say. That's the a posteriori, after experience, before and after experience. Or what do we bring to the experience, and what do we get, in order to get knowledge from it, and what do we derive from it? Sometimes this is framed in terms of innate ideas. That's one way that Descartes messes with it, and Locke denies. We don't have innate ideas. We get all our ideas from experience, says Locke. That's the empirical. That's one empiricist position. The opposite position is taken by Leibniz, which is that at least potentially all knowledge is a priori, and all knowledge certainly requires a priori material techniques. But in some sense, all empirical science could be known ahead of time by thinking hard enough. Now, you really would have to be omniscient, I guess, to think quite hard enough to get all of science a priori before observing anything. But it's in principle possible. Now, I mean, one beautiful expression of this, or motivation for it, although it's an incredibly perverse position. And again, like, in one sense, I go like, okay, wait, really? And in another, are like, no. But in another sense, I go like, wow, man, sally forth and fucking kick ass, you know? Like, there's a bold speculation. All right, and this is what our editors call, maybe this is a term they're getting from elsewhere. I'm maybe not quite up on the Leibniz scholarship. The concept containment view of truth. I define this pretty precisely on the handout, I guess. But here's like a passage. Like, the first thing I signed is a text called Primary Truths by Leibniz. Just as it's a pretty good introduction or setup for the monadology. The monadology. Hell yes. I want to get my PhD in monadology. What do you do, Daddy? No, I don't know. I'm a monadologist, you know. That's right. Professor of monadology. Okay. This is the way he frames his position in this text, Primary Truths of 1689. Therefore, the predicate or consequent is always in the subject or antecedent, and the nature of truth in general, or the connection between the terms of a statement, consists in this very thing, as Aristotle also observed. The connection and inclusion of the predicate in the subject is explicit in identities. Okay. Like, I am me. The meaness is included in the inus. That's a pretty bad example thrown around in tech schools, but in all, the morning star is the evening star. The morning star is Venus. But in all other propositions, it is implicit and must be shown through the analysis of notions. A priori demonstration rests on this. Okay, so here's the idea. I mean, in some sense, he's talking about like the nature of the universe, and in some sense, he's doing philosophy of language. And he frames it in terms of language. Subject, predicate, sentences. All right. So the claim is that every property that, let's say, I have, and everything that will ever happen to me is contained in the concept of me, is contained in the possibility of me from the get-go, or in eternity. And partly this is because the reason that maybe this occurs as a possibility is because of sort of maybe the sense that time is almost an illusion, or is an illusion to an eternal being, to God, to an omniscient being. This is one thing that we're trying to explain, is the nature of God's omniscience, actually. So God sees everything simultaneously. Eternality, or outside, atemporally. So God sees everything about you simultaneously, or everything about the earth simultaneously. God can know a priori. I guess here's my example. Like, Joe Biden is the president of the United States. Well, on Leibniz's view, that could have been known a priori at Joe Biden's birth, or before Joe Biden's birth, really, probably. Although this is misleading ways to put it because of the way this sticks the thing into time. Everything that happens, I mean, in another way, like, it sounds like this sometimes, like, everything that happens to me is my fault. Everything that happens to me, I mean, or is my responsibility in a way. That is, everything that will ever happen to me, or every aspect of me, you know, if my hairline is receding, whatever, that's contained in the very concept or essence of me. To me, it might seem like I could lose my hair and remain me. But to perfect knowledge, every hair on my head is actually an essential property of me. There are no non-essential properties of me. To omniscience, to perfect knowledge. So if we're seeking, true knowledge, we should seek it in exploring the internal essence of each substance in a way. And one thing I guess this might allow us to do is more and more be able to predict and control the future. Like, this is quite a different picture, I think, of like empirical science or like investigation, inquiry emerging in the modern period. And I'm not saying that it's barren like this, but it is awfully perverse, I think. But all right. Okay, so, but that is right. What I'm saying is, like, that's an exquisite opposite of the empiricism that we will encounter later in the semester. Descartes in the wax passage, for example, really makes, a priori conceptual inquiry fundamental to all knowledge, but he does it fairly casually and quickly. And in Descartes' whole oeuvre, there's a fascinating mixture of sort of a priori and a posteriori, empirical inquiry, and conceptual elucidation. But Leibniz goes all the way down this rationalist line, so it's emblematic, I think, and it's beautifully captured in this idea of the concept containment view of truth. Okay, it's really not, for example, this is not a correspondence theory of truth. It's not that the sentence is true because the world is as the sentence says it is. It's because the thing the sentence is about already has what you're saying, attributing to it in its essence. Every true subject predicate statement is an analytic statement in some sense. It follows from the meaning. God, I guess we got to say what analytic means. It follows from the meaning of the term Crispin that I'm wearing a striped shirt today, according to Leibniz. Or it would for omniscience, okay? And that's, look, there has to be an explanation for the fact that I'm wearing a striped shirt today. That's the principle of sufficient reason. There has to be an explanation, an adequate explanation for anything. Okay, why this and not otherwise? All right. And for Leibniz, there has to be a reason articulable in terms of the concept, the substance, the inherent properties of me. I think that's what he's saying. It's an amazing position, really. Okay. He's fundamental in still in logic and philosophy of language. People keep returning to these texts and just thinking like, well, he opened up this whole line of inquiry, or this whole vocabulary, for example, of possible worlds, ways of talking about these issues that are fundamental. or the indiscernibility of identicals and the identity of indiscernibles. If two things share all the same properties, they are the same thing. Or no two things differ only in number. Okay. All right, so just a brief move off of Spinoza and into the monadology. I'm going to do this in the sketchiest way, and I hope that we can do it a little more systematically on Thursday as we head in that direction of monads. Spinoza starts with substance metaphysics, definition of substance. If you accept Spinoza's definition of substance, I think, he's got you trapped. It's going to fall out so quick as it does, although, there's other lemmas and propositions and definitions. It's going to follow immediately from his definition of substance that there is only one. Okay, so for one thing, there can't be like God and nature. That would be two substances. That's impossible straight out of the definition of substance that you get in Spinoza. A substance is something that exists, that its existence does not depend on anything else. I mean, the way you got into this trap is that you start by saying what fundamentally exists? What fundamentally exists? What is it that has properties? If we peel back the layers, what's fundamentally real? And this is the Aristotelian move. Okay, so let's call whatever that is a substance, the fundamental things in the universe. Again, this is not the English word substance. The fundamentally existing things. And it might be things like us, for one thing. That's really important to all these people, actually. Us as substances, that is. Souls, maybe. Okay, so now if there can only be, if a substance cannot be defined in terms of its relations, but that is its modes for Spinoza, but only by its essential properties, and there can be only one, okay, then all this, the pantheism seems to follow. He just, there's only one thing. We have traced out this argument in Spinoza fairly carefully, and I'll do it again just for the heck of it, but maybe not right here, right now. There's only one thing. All right, now that seems to be, okay, so then you're trapped, and I think Leibniz went and visited Spinoza to ask him about this, to press him on this or challenge him on this, I suspect. Right? I think Leibniz felt the power of that argument. He accepted the substance concept and the definition of substance in Spinoza, basically, okay? He might have refinements on his own definition of substance. But it's fundamentally the same as Spinoza's, which, well, it's related to the scholastic or Aristotelian notions. Okay, so he's accepting the definition of substance, or the question, what does fundamentally exist? And then he needs to resist what he, as well as much of Europe, immediately thinks is the heretical, atheistic, materialistic implications of Spinoza's view. I mean, that's unfair to Spinoza, the pantheist, okay? Spinoza is no atheist according to himself. And calling him a materialist is really primitive according to himself, okay? God has the one thing has infinitely many attributes. Right? But Spinoza does have this idea of the inherently material system that is studyable by science, and nothing outside it is relevant because it's all the one thing, God. It's all part of the one thing, let's say. Panentheism. Okay. So Leibniz accepts the definition of substance, maybe a bunch of the sorts of definitions that Spinoza gives. In some ways, he's a frigging Spinozist. All right. But then he draws radically, fascinatingly different conclusions. And this is maybe a tribute to the power of Spinoza's argument to produce responses, if this is best conceived as a response to Spinoza, responses this elaborate and this seemingly perverse. Okay? Now, so, I mean, the basic picture that emerges, I drew it up on the whiteboard last time at the end, is that instead of the one blobject, God nature, with infinitely many other attributes, we have a universe of perhaps infinitely many, I better look that up, individual substances. Individual substances. I'm one, I think. Leibniz thinks he is himself one. That's the model, really, is the human soul, okay? The human mind. And really, this is a fight for the existence of Leibniz. That's one thing he felt maybe the threat of Spinoza. Spinoza's going to make me identical to nature. Not a distinct thing, not a substance, with no essential attributes. Okay, not characterizable as an intrinsic, fundamentally existing thing, but part of like a material universe and about to flow back into that at death or something like that. Okay? Leibniz, in a way, is fighting, and I mean, this is very explicit in a way, for the immortality and just the sheer existence of the human individual as an essential, real, fundamental, existing thing, a substance. I mean, you know, you could be fighting for trees and whales and stuff like that too, but he doesn't seem so worried about that, perhaps. Okay. Now, so let's just start with how would it be possible that I am a real thing, a substance, and you are a real thing, in the face of Spinoza's proof that there's only one substance? It would have to be the case that I have only essential properties, and I am characterizable fully in terms of my essential properties, and you are characterizable fully in terms of your essential properties. We don't have to specify any relations. All the properties that make up the substance are intrinsic properties. It doesn't seem to be true of me, right? Like I'm my mom's son, okay? I am a relational being. I'm spatially located, okay, in relation to all these things. I have a gravitational pull on me, and I'm exerting a gravitational pull on different things. Okay. And you know, things are going to happen that I don't even know could possibly happen to me. You know, might happen in the next few minutes even. You know, whatever. I don't seem to be a substance in a Spinoza sense. He definitely doesn't think he himself is. Spinoza doesn't. Okay, I don't think. Which is amazing. It's kind of the wisdom of the East, too. Like we're going to melt into God. The wisdom of the East. I just read that phrase in Zora Neale Hurston. That's why I used that. But this kind of mystical identity is available in Spinoza. Boy, it's not available in Leibniz. In Leibniz, I'm sealed up in my own intrinsic properties. So, okay, so the picture is that each substance each monad substance is bouncing around the universe or among the other substances. I shouldn't say bouncing around because they're not even touching each other. each is completely characterizable in terms of its essential properties by omniscience because of the concept containment view of truth. Okay? The concept of containment view of truth entails that I'm completely characterizable in terms of my a priori properties. Everything that ever happens to me, every property I ever come to possess. And this is true of each thing that actually exists fundamentally. That solves the problem. That there can be very many, there can be two, there can be many, there could possibly be infinitely many of these things. But each is sealed completely up within itself. It consists entirely of intrinsic and properties, and it has no relational properties. And as we're going to then now investigate, each of these monads represents the entirety of the universe, or the set of monads as a whole, and whatever's outside the monads, I guess, or created them and stuff. It's almost the Cartesian representational mind, now monadized. Like I'm sitting here and I am representing a world, okay? In my experience, I'm in relationship to these lamps, to this room, to my kids, to, whatever. But that's because they're all representations in my consciousness. In fact, potentially, I am, as Pascal said, we read this in Pascal, but also in Spinoza, connected to every single thing in the entire universe, like just even gravitationally and stuff like this. But what that means for Leibniz is that this complete intrinsic monad represents the entire universe in its representational. That's what a monad is. It's a representational system. It's the universe in microcosm. None of us touch the other, but each of us represents all the others. What a wild, amazing solution. Even if it's a wild, amazing solution to a problem that really, does it arise though? Can we avoid, if we could avoid substance metaphysics, we could avoid this whole procedure. But do we want to avoid this whole procedure? And can we avoid substance metaphysics? Those would be other questions. Onward into the monadology.